All right, we're live. So, I'm Joshua Kemble. This is my channel where I do live streams while I'm working on art. Right now, I'm working on a graphic novel called Not Death But Love, the strange supernatural case of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. That's the comic that I'm currently working on for West Margin Publishing, written by my sister Lavender Vroman. So I'll be working on finishing up coloring pages or a page of that. It should be a relatively short stream, like probably about an hour or so. So that's what I'll be working on. But before we get into the meat of it and like actually start working on it, let me just explain to anybody tuning in for the first time who I am. So I'm Joshua Kemble. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 15 years, going on toward 20. Been a professional art director for about 8 years. That's what I do for my day job. And then when I'm not art directing or working on graphic designs and illustrations for clients, I'm often working on comics. So I've been doing comics for a long time. My first graphic novel, Two Stories, came out from Marcosia and is available to buy from Amazon. And that is a really like confessional autobiographical comic about my journey learning how to deal with depression, as well as caregiving for somebody with panic disorder, and the irregularities of growing up in a Christian school and some of the hypocrisy kind of witnessed in that context. And then just released on the 7th is my book, Jacob's Apartment, which is in stores everywhere now. And you can also order online. I recommend you go to your local bookstore, and if they're not carrying Jacob's Apartment, request that they carry a copy at their store. It's available through Diamond Distribution, so it should have distribution everywhere. And one of the exciting things since I last streamed is this came out. I'll be at TCAF next weekend, which is kind of crazy. So toward the end of the week, I'm going to be getting on an airplane, flying to Canada, and promoting and selling copies of this book. And honestly, I don't even know if I'm ready. I have to send a bunch of info on my flight plan, where I'm staying, all of that stuff to my publisher, so they can then send it to the organizers, who can then send it to the Canadian government. Because there's all sorts of complexities with like traveling to a different country right now. And so that's been really interesting. And I have to get all that ironed out today because I've just been busy like at my day job all week. But amid all the busyness and chaos, I have a book out and I'm very excited about this. So if you guys are in the Toronto area or on the side of the US that's like right near Toronto, I recommend you guys go to TCAF. Stop by the Graphic Mundi booth. I'll be there all week. And I think the last day, I believe I'm doing a panel that's going to be talking about sort of discussions of mental illness in comics, which actually I'm really excited about. I think it's about sort of like writing books that are not neurotypical in subject matter, which I think is really exciting. And I think it's also about grief, which in art, which is like perfect for what I do, because I tend to write on topics of like being non-neurotypical. I tend to lean into topics that have to do with like grief and stuff like that. So I'm really excited about that panel. I don't really know much other than that. And again, like I'm a bit of a homebody. I'm a stay-at-home cartoonist, basically. I mean, not really stay at home, but it's like when I'm not at work, I'm pretty much in the house. I'm homebound. I don't do a lot of traveling. And so just traveling to a different country to be able to talk about comics, and not just my comics, but also see other people's comics and be around a bunch of other cartoonists. It's both exciting and terrifying because I don't travel a lot. So the idea of traveling out of country is just like very overwhelming and exciting. And with all that being said, I'm also making progress on Not Death But Love. And my goal this weekend is just to knock out as much of this as possible before I have to go fly out to Canada. I believe I'm flying on Thursday, and so I have from now till Thursday to get as much of this book uh, and progress on it done as I can before I basically I'm going to lose all of next weekend just promoting the new book. Although it's a good problem to have. Jake is joining in the chats. How's it going, Jake? And he said art is a great outlet. Congrats on the new release. And he said if I haven't said it, thanks. Yeah, it's really exciting. It's also kind of weird. Marcosia was a good publisher for two stories. And I have no gripes about Marcosia, but it was like a much smaller publisher. Graphic Mundi has a much broader distribution than my previous publisher. So it's like, for me, the most exciting part, other than the fact that, like, I mean, it is a beautiful book. I don't know. I think I've mentioned the binding before, but it's like when you look at the way this book is bound, even though it's softback, you can tell it's like they put a lot of care and love into the printing. The paper choice is just perfect for it. I'm just really excited about it. They gave me full liberty to do all the typography on the cover, and so which I was super inspired by Daniel Klaus's typography for the cover. There's a David Boring typeface that was custom that he did, and the treatment of that typeface was so exciting to me that I had always had it in the back of my mind. I want to do kind of like a block face type like that. And luckily, like, Graphic Mundi let me. Anyhow, I'm rambling, but the point is, the big weird learning curve that was so exciting about the release of Jacob's Apartment, it's not even a learning curve, it's just an exciting thing, was like going on like Barnes and Noble's website and then saying like to search for my book, and I search for it and it's like orderable online. But then when I like look at it for like in store, and I don't know if these are on, like, you guys will have to let me know, especially friends of mine in LA. But when I looked at in store, it's like almost all of the Barnes and Nobles in Southern California are like in store, in store, in store. So they're like, it's not just available for order, but it's something they've already ordered and either have in the back or have on the shelves. Now, the reality of that, I have no idea, because like I said, it was only a few days ago. So you guys will have to let me know, but people in the US, like if you go to a store, I'm just going to ask, if you watch this thing and you go to like a Barnes and Noble or a store, just take a picture if you see it on the shelves. I still haven't witnessed that. Like, I haven't experienced walking into the bookstore and seeing my book on the shelves of a big box chain store. I've definitely experienced that in the past with like a comic book shop, which is always cool. But for me, like one of my big things as an artist, I've felt this way since I was a kid, is I've been really convicted that being a cartoonist should be something that gets you into bookstores. I think that graphic novels are books. I mean, like, comics are books, and they're not treated as books. They haven't for most of my life. So the idea that like comics are in bookstores now, and then on top of that, like that was always something I just daydreamed about when I was younger. But then on top of that, the idea that it might actually be my comic in bookstores is just beyond thrilling. And not just like small bookstores, but like the big box chain stores, which again, when you're getting this book, I prefer you go to like a mom and pop store or like a small business and like support them and like order it through them. But the point being, like, it's just neat to know that like my book is going to be in these areas that are accessible to a lot of people. Because like in my city, there's like not a lot of indie bookstores. Like there just isn't. And then the comic shops that are out here, and this isn't disparaging them, it's just a small, like, it's the audience that's out here. there's not like a lot of like a big indie section in those comic shops. So for a lot of people here, the only way they're ever going to find indie comics or literary comics, they'll get independent, but like literary comics that aren't just doing like superhero stuff is going to be at like a Barnes and Noble. So like for me, just the idea that like my book is going to be there and available for people potentially is just like thrilling and exciting. So that was my long rant and thing. But let's get into finishing up flatting. So, before I get into that, I do want to encourage people. Jim, I saw you in the chats. Jim said, I fully endorse this book. I appreciate that, Jim. And then Jake said his choice of doing like Eisner and using environment for the title by throwing the title graffiti of Ghost World has stuck with. That nesting of an anonymous person doing that is a nice detail. And he said that I want to steal. Yeah, I mean, there's just awesome things about the way that Klaus did covers and stuff like that. But it's funny, what like for me as like the designer in me, when I see like a typeface treatment that I like store it in the back of my brain, and I'm like, I'm gonna like pull that idea at some point. It was kind of fun to do. Um, and then Jake was saying the local comic shops nearby him have a wide variety. I feel like this is a very like I think the U.S. is getting better with it, and I will say like my local comic shop does its best, but it's just like the area that I live in, and I think particularly I think in the U.S. indie friendly comic shops are like they exist. They're just very spread out, and I don't think literary comics were. I think they're changing, but I don't think they were treated like it's been a long time coming for literary comics to like really start hitting the forefront of availability at like the comic shops out here, because it's such a dominated market when it comes to like superheroes or sci-fi and fantasy. Like that's kind of the main market, which is weird because a lot of sci-fi fantasy authors felt the opposite when they were trying to get their books in bookstores and not just viewed as like pulps. Like they wanted to actually have their books viewed as books. I remember hearing Ray Bradbury talk about that, where like they had kind of the opposite, where it took them forever to just get viewed as like legitimate literary pieces and stuff like that in the book world. Whereas in the comic book world, it's so dominated by the other version, where it's dominated by fantasy and horror and science fiction and mainly by superhero stuff, that it's like the opposite fight, where there's a lot of cartoonists like Will Eisner even wrote about this a lot, where he wanted to do like really literary comics, and he was like there's just no market for it. The people don't want it, but like there needs to be. Anyhow, so I'm excited to like play my little part in trying to make that happen. Doesn't mean I'm doing it well, but hey, I'm giving it a shot. Anyhow, and then Jake said the LCS system here is more a specialty shop than a book exclusive one, because of multiple hobby crossovers and market interests. But that's reflected in other shops too that primarily focus on multimedia sales. Record and movie stores had to diversify. Yeah, there's that too. Even like the big box chain bookstores out here, and like in the U.S., even like beyond just the smaller stores, but even the big megalith stores have had to like start selling, like toys and stuff like that to kind of to keep the revenue coming in, because a lot of people are not buying books in bookstores anymore. Okay. I can continue to talk. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. Let's see if we can do this. I have 4 panels to flat. So that's what I'm going to do during this stream. And we'll kind of see how that goes. So everything you see above, I should mention, I was on Gary Hodges' channel with Jim Lujan, who was in the chats. And then Corey Kerr. And we kind of had like a long, fun conversation. But that was this morning. So I did most of the flatting of this on that channel. So if you guys aren't subscribed to Gary's channel, subscribe to it. He does a really good like Saturday stream, and I usually try not to stream at the same time because again, he's a friend, and his stream's super fun to hop on and watch. And yeah. So anyhow, I hopped on that on the later half, um, and I think the first half of it I kind of missed because I was sleeping. Um, yeah. Okay. So we're gonna get into flatting this out, and then again, like I'm really excited, and I'm thankful to everybody who's actually pre-ordered the book or ordered the book. It makes a massive difference, and it's like even if somebody's watching this stream, if you order the book, it makes a massive difference in the in the possibilities for that book to have sales. It's kind of amazing. Like in indie books, like one little sale, it sounds so cliche, but it's like one little sale makes all of the difference. And so I really, beyond just my work, like people out there who are buying and supporting indie comics, like you guys, um, we as consumers of it have a lot of power over what gets made and what continues to get made, and what gets stocked at stores and stuff like that. It's very very encouraging, that that's the case. But I did want to like reiterate how much it means to get support from people, for this weird little cartooning thing that I do. Um, anyhow, let's see here. Ooh, good question. Jake said, "This sounds weird, but how do you think with the camera? Is it scene oriented or character oriented?" I think it switches. In this current, like, there are different parts of the script, and like at least when it comes to this book, I tend to think, let's see, scene or character oriented. I tend to think with um, the emotion of the script. So basically, in this case, um, like this page has like a couple things that I really wanted to focus on. Some of it is the character emotion, and I try to do a lot of that with the acting of the characters. So I think acting takes care of a lot of the character stuff. But then also the way that I'm choosing to frame the shot, um, like the different panels, like the way that I'm choosing to kind of frame it or stage it, is trying to kind of highlight the emotion of the scene. But then there's also pages like this particular page, is much more scene oriented than character oriented. Although I have some character oriented parts to it, but it kind of just depends on the. I know it's a boring answer, but it kind of depends on what's needed in the script. In this case, there's specific actions happening that I have to depict, and so this page is a much more like methodical action-based page. But I still managed to have that. So if you notice on the second row, there's a panel where we're seeing Elizabeth read a letter. And in that case, I thought that it was more important to focus on character than scene. And it was more important to show what was happening to the character than the actions. So it got equal, if not more important presence than the actions that are occurring on the page, because that was an emotional moment. So weirdly enough, it's like whether it's scene or character, to me, it's always about, I guess with me with comics, it's always about emotion. It's about what emotion is are we trying to feel here in this scene, and then the emotion kind of dictates the needed, paneling. Does that? I hope that doesn't sound like a cop out, Jake, because that's a really good question, and I hope I answered it well. So it's basically both, but if I have to pick, uh, especially for my own stuff, it's very character driven. I think this comic will be very character driven. It very much focuses on, about 4 characters throughout the entire thing. There's a lot of ancillary and side characters, but there's 4 characters, and there's some huge um, character arcs that are like the main focus and crux of the story. However, there's still plot, but it's just like plot is in service to, um, this grander narrative that's about the character confronting, the kind of the typical hero's journey. And in this case, we're going through like one of the bigger character arcs within the first 20 pages of the book, which I actually really admire. It's a 200 plus page book, and the focus of most things that have been written about the Barretts, we're just slamming through in the first 20 pages to get to the good stuff, which I'm excited about. Not that this isn't good stuff; it's a great part of the story, but I just love that, like, that like this will be the first story of the Barretts that I'm aware of that isn't just primarily focused on their romance early on, and her kind of escaping living with her kind of overbearing father. That's all basically getting put out of the way in the first 20 minutes or 20 pages. Philip said, "Howdy, Josh. How's it going, Philip?" Jake said, "I feel it oscillates, but I feel some framing are more frequent or heightened depending on the first or third person perspective in the narrative." I agree with you on that too. Um, you know, in in this, because it's kind of third person, it's definitely it's being approached a little more objectively than, say, like two stories, where two stories will have like these kind of moments where, the paneling will become like an airplane diagram or something like that. I don't know if there's going to be as much creative play in in what's being depicted in panels on this. I think this is much more going to be um, based on kind of actual actions and stuff. Whereas the first person stuff, you have a little bit more freedom, especially in the sense of interpretation and kind of emotional appeal and stuff. Let's see. Phillips here, and then Jake said, "No right or wrong. The answer I've learned is a personal observation and methodology." Yeah, it's kind of a weird part. Um, it's a weird part of comics where, for me, again, like I look at the important part of a story, to me, is the emotion of the story, and so I think, like, anytime I'm lost on, what to do for paneling or for sequencing of panels, I tend to just try to think, well, what are we trying to communicate here? But there's some things like on this page where it like has a story is obviously going to take primacy over character, and then there's times where character is going to totally take primacy um, over the plot. Good example. Another kind of character moment. This is just character establishment. Is this panel, which is literally just functioning to show you where Elizabeth Barrett Browning was at when she was Elizabeth Barrett. So we're seeing that she has published works. She's translated some stuff. She's published some poems. She's changed her publication name a few times, but we are establishing that she is a writer who's been published at this point, just with that little panel. Now it's like a little side thing, and this one doesn't have like a huge focus on it, but it's an important thing in establishing the character early on in the story, where we're seeing like, okay, this is a person who, like, who's already accomplished quite a lot by the time this is, you know, moving forward. Let's see here. I might have to put my dog up on the couch because he is an old dog and he just made a little noise saying that he wants to go sit on the couch. So I might have to disappear to do that. Let's see. Give me, yeah, at least finish this selection here. But I am excited about how these pages have been coming out. Like I do feel pretty good about the way that they've been coming along so far. I need to steal colors from previous pages. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this, and then I will disappear to help my elderly pug get onto the couch. I'll be right back in about 2 seconds. Hang on. Come on, pug. Come on up. Here you go, dude. All right, I have assisted one elderly pug, and I feel much better about myself and my life now. He's a cute dog. It's just, you know, as he's gotten older, his back legs just aren't quite as strong as they used to be. But yeah, it's interesting. I definitely, personally, like the things. There's a couple things I really love paying attention to that I think is very specific to my style, that I think I'm fairly good at, even though I'm not like the best artist in comics or anything like that. I think that some of the unique things about my storytelling is, and some of the things that I picked up. Well, let's get into that first, I guess. Some of the things I picked up from looking at Chris Ware was his pacing and timing. The thing I love about Chris Ware is he has a lot of patience when he's sitting with a character. And so, like, Ware will show an action, like, very slowly. He'll kind of slow down the panels in order to focus on an action that furthers the emotion in the story. And I think that like, one of the things I really love about Chris Ware and his cartooning is he fully develops characters. Like, when you read a Chris Ware book, you rarely are like confused about like the depth of the character. You usually have a really good sense of who these characters are, and what their sorrows are and what their emotions are, and like, I mean, even what their little like personality tics are, like when they're communicating, you know, if somebody rubs their ear, or like just weird little details that kind of tell you a lot about the person. I think that Chris Ware is uniquely good at that, and that's something I pick up on and I definitely use in my books. It's like, you know, I like to slow things down a bit sometimes and focus on a character's actions, and spend a little time with the characters. So that's one of the things. But one of the things that I'm really big on in comics is acting, in the sense of, I think like a lot of times in comics, people will have characters that have expressions that are like two expressions, and they'll be talking or angry. Especially in action comics, you'll see this a lot, where it's like the expressions only change like once or twice. The mouth shapes have like 2 or 3 variations. There's not like a ton of like actual acting going on with the characters. Whereas for me, I like to have my characters act. I like to have a lot of different facial expressions. hand gestures and movements. Even the way that I'm having Elizabeth kind of hold these books is very intentional for like where she's at right now in the story. Because Elizabeth is at a point where she's about to kind of like there's a reason she's kind of cradling the books the way she is on this panel, and we'll find out on the next panel why that is. But she's not feeling too great, right? And so there's a lot of like complexity to the way that I have the characters positioned, and like I like to try to have a variation, like showing the different emotions that somebody is feeling as they're speaking. Another one that's just like a personal thing that I don't think people pay attention to enough. And I'm sure I've fallen short on maybe not getting this right every time. But one of my goals is also a pet peeve of mine in comics is when somebody's saying a phrase and you could like swap out what they're saying with like any text. And there's nothing about the position of their mouth that would suggest they were saying anything different than the new type you threw in there. I feel like that's kind of a shame. Like I think when we're doing comics, when you're drawing your characters and you're writing dialogue, the mouth and the words that are being said should sort of sync up. Almost, I mean, animators often think about this, but I have noticed some cartoonists don't, so that like when a character is talking, again, like there's nothing about their expression that uniquely ties into what they're saying. It's just, so for me, I like to think about like the vowels that somebody's expressing with their mouth movement. And usually I'll try to think of like a vowel or like a specific part of a word that has a lot of power in what they're saying, and that'll be the position in their mouth that I draw when they're when I'm paneling them. So that's something I might overthink a bit, but that's something I think that is unique, a little bit unique about like my style and approach. Oh, I like this. Jake said one of the working methods I want to employ is that whenever there's been an established environment, I want to minimize the background and focus on what ought to be focused on. Yeah, and I think that's good, but then there's also so much of a background that tells the story as well. And a lot of my early comics, this is actually, I think a long time ago when I had started Jacob's Apartment. This is years ago. The first few pages, Diana Schultz took a look at it of Dark Horse. She actually took a look at it and gave me some feedback and tips that I actually took a lot of to and applied them. But one of her biggest pieces of feedback was that a lot of my comics at the time just had a lot of talking heads. And talking heads aren't bad. Like I'm not saying that's a criticism, but the way that I was utilizing them wasn't super great because a lot of it was just talking heads over black backgrounds. And again, it's kind of this weird thing where yes, it's good to like focus on characters and stuff like that. You still want to continually establish backgrounds, and like for me, for my own style, I found that I had to like kind of force myself, like even on a page like this, to really go through it and have backgrounds in every panel. Where I can have backgrounds, I think it's important for me to like make sure that I do have backgrounds. Also, because it's a historical fiction book, I think it's fun to have backgrounds that actually tie into the history. So there's that too. But it is weird where it's like I had the opposite problem of maybe some people draw too much detail and like lose focus on the characters or whatever. I had the opposite problem for the longest time in my art, where I had to like just learn how to draw the stuff I didn't even want to draw in a scene, like the backgrounds, which I tend to not want to draw backgrounds. Like I don't get get a lot of joy drawing backgrounds, but I've learned throughout for a while. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like for me, doing backgrounds and including backgrounds and kind of doing the legwork and taking the time to do that has been a big learning curve for me. Let's see. And then Jake said, I'm really taken by close-up shots, but that speaks to my interest in drama through gesture. Yeah, same here. I think that close-up shots are probably my favorite thing. Like in comics, I love a lot of close-ups. And again, and that might be, yeah, that might be explained through an interest in drama. It could also be explained through an interest in faces. I just, I think the first thing that got me into drawing was human faces. I think that people's faces are still to this day, drawing a face is one of the most fun things for me to draw. Everything else is kind of like work. But drawing faces has always been just like a real, I don't know, it's just like a real interest of mine. Like I like drawing faces. So I do like close-up panels a lot. But yeah, the other stuff is it all just kind of feels like work, you know? Although I think that in the last few years, I've gotten better with backgrounds. Like I'm less weird about backgrounds than I was, And then Philip was saying, yeah, I think that would be a no-brainer. I think when he's talking about dialogue and mouth movements, that makes sense though, Philip, because I mean, you come from an animation background, and it's like an animation. The idea that a character would be opening their mouth to speak and their mouth wouldn't be syncing up with what they're saying is like unthinkable. Here's a question. This is Jake. Oh, hang on. Philip was saying, what little experimenting I've done with comics, the dialogue has to be emphasized by the expression in the mouth. Jake was saying, here's the question though. Is it the first letter of the word or the unication of the word that's the strongest in use in a sentence where you want to emphasize the lip sync? So for me, when it comes to like the comic, I think it's whichever looks most powerful, but I tend to go with like the most prominent sound. And then every once in a while, if you go with the most prominent sound, and then it looks just kind of super funky, then you consider like kind of changing it up and going with a different thing. But that's, again, that's my take on it. I'm gonna do this necklace now. Yeah, Philip's correct. He said, I thought about that, Jake. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think it depends on the emphasis of the dialogue. Exactly. Because, like, for instance, if I was going with the most prominent on that word, we must go at once. Once. Once should be probably, in theory, if I'm going with like the most prominent, it's going to be once. But it looks weird to have somebody going, ugh. So instead I went with right? Does that make sense? Because is just going to, it just looks visually weird. Whereas having her saying the in must, that looked way better. So rather than draw somebody going, I had her saying which is much more complimentary to Elizabeth's face. And in that case, I just went with like the least weird looking one. Yeah, so I think it's like I think with art, one of the fun things about art is, there's no hard and fast rules. There's definitely rules to art, but there's no like um, rule that can't be broken. I think with art, it's just important when you're going to break rules in art that you know what rules you're breaking, right? And have a reason for it. So I think that that's going to be one of those ones where I've just seen a lot of comics where I think you could ask the person, um, like who drew it, like, hey, what's the person saying here? Like, what is their mouth doing? And their honest answer would just be like, I don't know, you know. Um, and I think in that case, if you can't answer what their mouth is doing, well, then maybe there's a problem of clarity. I was gonna get into the costume, but I want to finish Elizabeth on these first. So let's get into that. So we're going to do Elizabeth's hair. And these pages I've been doing a little differently. Um, these panels, like I've been doing more one at a time than holistically, because on a big page like this with this many panels, doing the like kind of getting rid of each color method can be quite intense if you're trying to do it with each panel in mind. Um, Jake said there's a ton of caveats. I feel like it's a necessity in action-based comics, but it's in more talky scenes of genre, it's up for consideration. Oh, and then Philip said, "Yeah, I can see that, Jake. I haven't done a lot with comics, so I'm not as experienced in that way." And then he said, "Mood cues, I think, are the verbalizing, but that cuts the opportunity to communicate with other subtitles." Yeah, I mean, I think like you have a whole realm of ways to kind of communicate mood, and one of the other things you'll see with my characters in my comics is my characters use their hands a lot. So um, there's a ton of hand movement in the communication that happens in my comics where a character will be speaking, but they talk with their hands pretty actively, and I think that's an important thing in communication, but it's an extremely important thing in my comics. Like I think that might be one of the strengths, because again, I may not be like the strongest artist, but it's like I definitely am cognizant of those things where I think there are some artists who are like much stronger at drawing, but like they don't do that effort. And sometimes that can cause like a comic that's otherwise well drawn to kind of like fall flat. And people may not even know why like a comic isn't emotionally resonating with them. That might just be that like maybe the character's talking about something intense and their hands are just dead to the side, or they're doing a strange like gesture that you wouldn't use when communicating a certain thing. Let's see here. So now we're just doing the hair. And then we have Jake was saying I can't draw faces right because of the autism. Hence why I want to do realistic renditions and aim why I don't want to do realistic and aim for cartoonish renditions. Huh. I never even considered that. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I'm not great at reading people's emotions in person all the time, but I can in art. Like I can communicate it in art. Okay, I might be. I don't know, but then again, who knows? Maybe I'm poor at it too. Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of. Let's do some light skin tone. Getting there, guys. Skin tone selections. Getting there. Jake said maybe me being a sucker for cartoons and anime, like a lot of autistic people, is because there's a clarity. Yeah, I could buy that for sure. Um, the communication, can be a little more exaggerated and clear and spelled out, and I can understand that. I probably, yeah, I could see that for myself as well. Um, yeah, I think there's a like for me, there's like an honesty in art that I find very refreshing. Um, Whereas I feel like sometimes there's like a dishonesty in a lot of things, and I think art tends to cut through a lot of the noise and sort of be pretty honest at its best. Let's see here, and we are making our. Wait a second. I gotta do the maid real quick. Okay, we gotta color this maid real quick. Let's do that first. Philip said the arm looks off. I'm not sure which arm. You got to tell me which panel. I'm not arguing with it. I don't know which arm or which panel you might be referring to. Sometimes there's a delay too in like the comments and like in my reading it. So yeah, that's true. Art can wrap truth in lies. There's definitely lies wrapped into lies as well. Yeah, I could see that. But I do feel like there's like an inner truth that tends to express itself in art that is not. I don't know. It's like it kind of like art at its best. I don't know if it can help but being true. Like I feel like it's an important part of art being any good at all. There's like an inner truth to it, um, as nerdy as that is. Hmm. We're gonna get our okay hair color now. Oh, okay, cool. We were doing hair color. 6th one where she's leaning over the letter. Okay, I'll take a look at it. And he said, I'm being OCD again. He said, I think it was the 6th one where she's leaning over the letter. When you pull back, you don't notice it. Okay. I'll take a look at it, though, because if I want to correct it. Not always perfect at anatomy, for sure. And I'm always open to, like, hearing whether there's an improvement or not. Huh. Interesting. Now I'm confused. I'll try to find it. Oh, I see. You're talking about the. Okay, I think I see what you're talking about. Yeah, it's that shoulder. I think I might need to fix that. I'll see what I can do. Okay, let's get the because now I think I see what you're saying. You're talking about this panel. Yeah, that shoulder is a little strange. I think it's the indent. I might have put a little too much, like exaggerated the indent on the shoulder blade a little too much, and so it starts to look almost like a second shoulder blade rather than the indent in it. Um, Point being, I think I see what you're talking about, Philip. I'll see what I can do. We'll see how much progress we make with the colors here. All right, we got Crimson Owl, Ronnie, joining us in the chats. How's it going, Ronnie? How you doing? How are the comics coming? That's interesting. Jake said, he said he's of the viewpoint that there are fallacies even when art does kind of like an excellent job at telling the truth. Yeah, there's fallacies in truth in general, you know. But I still think it's something that's very unique to art. Fallacies there or not. I don't know. But maybe I'm just being like an art loving weirdo by saying that. Yeah. It's the 9th panel. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, that again, like, yeah, that I think it's that line in the shoulder blade. It's kind of weird. So I do need to take a look at it. That's in response to Philip pointing out a little bit of a weird look on the anatomy. Do 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 do. We are getting closer, though, guys. It's funny how long the process of these things takes. But I think mostly these these pages that have these crazy panel counts have been like taking me excessively longer than the other pages, for sure. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit here. We're at about the hour mark. So that means I'm going to play you guys a trailer for my book that came out on the 7th. And if you guys haven't picked up, you should. It's for Jacob's Apartment, my graphic novel, that is now in stores everywhere. And if you go to a store that it's not in, at least in the United States, if you're going to a store and it's not there, you should say, order it. Order Jacob's Apartment. It's available right now. It's a great book. You can tell them that. But what's cool is there's a very high likelihood you might go there and it's actually in store, which is really exciting and kind of a first. I've had books in stores, but this is in like big box chain stores and stuff. So that being said, let's check out the trailer, see if this is something you guys would want to pick up and support. So let me throw that up real quick. Right now we'll go back to, I love to use this as a placeholder for flats I haven't finished yet. So we've got our magenta placeholder, and then I'm going to play the trailer. All right, here we go. Here's the trailer for Jacob's Apartment. Enjoy. And if you guys want, next weekend too, if you're in the Toronto area or near Toronto, I'll be at Toronto Comics Festival all weekend at the Graphic Mundi booth. And so I, stop by and say hi. Assuming everything goes well with, like, I know flying in, there's there's some weird, traveling internationally is insane right now. But I'm going to, hell or high water, do my darndest to get there. I have tickets staying up there, so it should be pretty fun. And I'll see you guys there. And yeah, so let's watch Jacob's Apartment trailer, and then we'll finish up the flats for this. All right. Clearly it seems that only in dreams can we be these things we've seen and walk around breathing pain. I don't know the part to play in this part of All right, we're back. How's it going? Jake said, art is a great simulation of discourse inside and outside, but I think the discussion outside of it has to be critical of it as well as praising its qualities that it tries to execute. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think there's, man, that's a long discussion. There's art that's sometimes ahead of its time, that's like you can see that especially with the expressionists. Um, or sorry, yeah, I think oh man, maybe I'm wrong. It's been a while, but it's like I'm always confusing these guys, so you can correct me in the chats. There's Monet and then there's Monet, and one of them is like more kind of a expressionist, and then the other is an impressionist. And I because they have similar names, this is like where like people on my MFA committee would just smack me upside the head for forgetting, but it's like the different, like, anyhow, one of the Monets, I think it was Manet, Manet, was did like these figures of women, like nudes, which were common at the time in the salon. Um, but like the weird thing about these particular paintings was that they actually were looking directly at the viewer, and this like caused like a huge uproar. Like everyone freaked out. I think it got banned from the salon. It was like this huge, just shocking thing. Like, how dare you draw nudes that are looking at the viewer? It was like this huge uproar. And it's like it's a completely common thing now, but the main issue of it was like people didn't like the idea of like a nude woman having agency. And I know it sounds all weird and like almost like feministic or whatever, but it was like this giant uproar. And it's only like really, I mean, years later that people realized that Manet was like a genius and was doing things stylistically. He was drawing human beings like much more like human beings. Um, and like people kind of recognize that later, but in its own time, he was like this outsider artist that was very criticized by like almost everybody in high society at the time. And so it's like, that's definitely one of those scenarios where like I think the artist actually knew better, and they actually knew what they were doing when they were having the gaze like face the viewer. Like he actually wrote about it, like he was intentional about it. He didn't agree with the general thought at the time that that was unacceptable. And like I think that, I don't know, I'm rambling, but I'm just thinking of a case where like the critics were kind of wrong. um, and that's happened before multiple times in art. So sometimes you have artists that are like way ahead of their time and are just misunderstood. And outside criticism could be like a hindrance to them, like hitting that, like, I don't know, like a level of genius or making good work. A cliche example of that would be like Van Gogh, too, right? Where most critics kind of hated Van Gogh, like in his lifetime. And then obviously later on, people were like, this is revolutionary work. But then on the other hand, you definitely have times where, you have like people like, even though I love him, like his art, Ed Wood made terrible movies. I mean, like even people who love Ed Wood movies would generally acknowledge they're like pretty bad movies. Like they're bad plots. They don't deal with criticism well. He didn't handle criticism well, and he thought of himself as like a Manet type figure where he's just this misunderstood genius. And in a weird way, he kind of was, because he's like the father of the B film. But on another, like, I mean, that's definitely one of those scenarios where like the critics were were insanely correct about it. Like he was making horrible movies, um, and even his notoriety later on, kind of came from the fact that like people are just kind of stunned at how bad. Like even as a fan of B movies, I don't know if any of you guys have like sat through watching all of Plan 9 from Outer Space. It is hard, like even as a fan of B movies. Um, it's a hard movie to sit through the entirety of because it's really bad. I mean, it's just a really bad movie. It's even hard when you're looking for like tongue in cheek humor. It's a pretty rough movie. However, again, like I'm glad Ed Wood made movies, but I don't think like maybe he would have been making great movies how do you listen to the critics? Like, it's hard to say. Or how do you listen to the critics? Maybe you would have made um, terrible movies less and just had no movies to show whatsoever. And which would be an equal shame because at least we have really bad B movies by Ed Wood that are great, but they're great because they're bad. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, that's me rambling about it. Ronnie was saying Van Gogh is my favorite. Van Gogh's amazing. He's very like popular now. He's probably like the most known painter like to exist, I would imagine. Um, there's not a lot of people who don't know Van Gogh, and I think his story is really it's cliche to mention, but it's like cliche for a reason. It's definitely one of those stories of like a case where an artist was making brilliant art and like years later got discovered. I've talked about this though, like I think this is a common question among artists, right? Like who would you rather be? Would you rather be the guy kind of making hackneyed art in their lifetime and getting some credit for it, or the guy who's like the unknown genius who like isn't discovered till after their death, who revolutionizes art and yet isn't like acknowledged in their own lifetime. And I've always felt like I'd like to make great art. I mean, that's definitely a goal, but it would be nice in my own lifetime. Like I'm not I don't have ambitions to be the guy who's making stuff that's like remembered after I'm dead. Because after I'm dead, I don't know if I'm going to care. However, it'd be nice to be making that kind of art. Like I think cartoonists sometimes forget that we're artists, and that we should be like aspiring to make good art, like whatever that is. And that, I mean, I'm sure Jake could point out like some of the kind of complexities in that in itself, right? Because like, what is even good art, right? Like that can be a whole weird discussion too, because it's really hard. Because it's kind of like a slippery. That has a bunch of fallacies too. Whenever you talk like beauty or art, you start getting into these realms and territories that are really slippery definitions, and it's a hard discussion to have because so much of it has to do with like taste and like personal preferences and yeah, it's a weird one, man. I don't know if any of that is interesting to you guys at all. Oh, Ronnie said he has a book with his art and all his letters to his brother in the back. Yeah. Oh man, the letters to his brother, man. They're kind of heartbreaking because you realize like this is a guy who like he had this dream, like he went to Japan and found this like fishing village that was like the most like peaceful area he had ever been. And he had this dream where he was going to get all his buddies who are artists to just kind of like live in this like fishing village. That was like his dream, was like, we're all just gonna like start a little art commune out there. Everybody's gonna be happy. We're gonna do this like fishing village commune. And like nobody went for it. It never happened, but it was like his kind of dream. Um yeah, he was not like it's weird because he definitely was mentally disturbed, you know, and some people think it was like the paint fumes. There's all sorts of stuff like that. But but there is this like weird perception that I think sometimes makes him a little more crazy than he was. And some of it I think is that he was like just a really lonely guy. Um, he was lonely and kind of like seeking companionship of other artists, and had these like dreams of like kind of creating community and stuff. And it just a lot of it fell short. But yeah, those letters. The other great thing about those letters too is that like his brother. I mean, Ronnie, you've got them, so that's cool. I don't think I have that book with his letters. I saw like an exhibit that was curated around his letters years ago, and it just like was incredible. But it was also kind of comforting to know that like he did have like a brother who really cared. Like he had like loving people in his life who cared for him and took care of him, and kind of had his back, and that's nice because I think sometimes that gets written out of the story too. Um, and you know, sometimes people will paint him like a guy who just had no connections and no community and was completely isolated, and that's not exactly the case either. Um, but, you know, I mean, like, would you want to be Herman Melville, right? Who like you write this like masterpiece that like nobody cares about or likes, and then you die, and then it becomes the thing taught in like all high schools or schools? Or would you rather be like a, I don't know, like Michael Crichton type character where you're like, you know, in your lifetime, like a wild success and people make movies of what you do and stuff, but you're arguably probably not making, you know, art and pieces of art that are going to be like studied for generations. I don't know. It's a hard one to. It's always a hard one to answer, but I do kind of feel like, to be honest, I'd rather just be like I'd rather have some high fives in my lifetime. Although I am like again, I will aim to make the best art I can. I'd rather have like, you know, that stuff happen while I'm alive. Um, so we are getting closer and closer to finished here, guys. There's a background with a book that I'm working on. There's a painting frame that I missed the corner here. Philip said he missed a chunk. He had to grab his dinner. Did he miss much? Um, don't tell Philip about the time that a giant unicorn flew in front of the screen. Um, that was kind of crazy. The rapture happened around me, and like a bunch of people disappeared. Um, let's see. No, Philip, you didn't miss anything. Wait, you guys. I should turn this into a game. Jake and Ronnie, let Philip know what he missed. What kind of crazy things happened on stream while Philip was gone? I mean, I think a lot of the answer is just going to be I color filled a wall. Jake said, I don't want to be commercially accessible. I want, like James Joyce, to be studied long after I'm gone so the academics can scratch their heads, then the walls for answers. The true success is when people talk of your work, it will be talked about for longer, uh, the more in depth it is. Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to make work that's remembered. That would be good. But I do kind of feel like, I guess I'm just saying, like, I think I'd be okay with like less of that and more of like the success in my lifetime. Because again, like it'd be great to make great art, but it's such a brutal reality for people who, it never hits. I don't know. I feel like we should try, um, and I try pretty, you know, pretty hard to like try to acknowledge like the people who are making great work now. Like, but the irony is like I think inevitably when somebody's doing something that's a little against the norm, um, it's always going to kind of go a little unsung. Um, Whereas if you're doing kind of like cat memes or something, it's a little easier to. I don't know. I feel like sometimes there's some stuff that's easier to kind of parade and acknowledge like in its time, you know. But would I, at the cost of making great art, want to have a wild success and make like mediocre art? Probably not. Like I do kind of like the idea of like trying to make something lasting, So maybe I would rather be Van Gogh. I don't know. Oh goodness. Did that just crash? No, no, no. Oh, thank goodness. I thought my screen just crashed. Nearly had a little mini heart attack there for a second. And I have subsequently hit Command S. Because as an artist, and this goes for any of you guys out there, if you are working digitally, hit save. Save a lot while you're working. Nothing worse than having something unsaved crash and then having to redo, you know, hours worth of work or sometimes just minutes, but save often is not a bad way to go. So I was reading this book on JD Salinger recently. There's all sorts of interesting stuff about that dude. For those of you who don't know, like if you read Jacob's Apartment, you'll probably start picking up on the fact that I like Salinger a little bit. Like I talk about Salinger in that book. Like I have a character talk about A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. It's like a short story from I believe 9 stories. It's been a while. It might actually be in Ray Ty the Roofing Carpenters, but I think it's in 9 stories. Um, and I like Salinger's writing a lot, the stuff that's been published. But anyhow, so one of the things I was excited to hear and learn was that like Salinger's like this weird character, very strange character, very polarizing personality. Um, but he also did this unique thing for writers, or there was a fable of him doing a unique thing that those of us who like his writing were really excited about, which was he's posthumously um, he has like a posthumous publication schedule supposedly, and this had been rumored for years that like J.D. Salinger was like stuck in his like shed that like was outside of his house, and he's been writing like for 40 to 50 years unpublished work, and that he upon his death would be like publishing some of this work. So anyhow, for those of us who are huge fans of Salinger, we all mourned the loss of Salinger as he died. Like that was a real loss to the world to like lose Salinger. But I think a lot of us were also like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have some new Salinger stories. And so it's been a while since, and we've seen no Salinger stories. So I almost like had just forgotten about it. Not in a like way where I forgot about the whole thing. I just haven't been thinking about it. But then I've been reading these biographies of Salinger that have come out more recently, and one of them suggests the fact that the next new Salinger story should be out by 2024, I think. And I was really excited to hear that because I had started to think for a second that maybe the whole thing was just like a myth, like imagine, if I disappeared or something, like if I got super famous, disappeared from the internet and never published a book again, and then was like, yeah, but I have, you know, 50 graphic novels that are they're going to be published posthumously. And then like, you know, I die and there's no books. Like after a while, people might be like, I don't know, that maybe Josh wasn't telling the truth there. So it was a similar thing, and I don't know why that's on my mind, but that was really exciting to hear, was the idea that he's going to be publishing those books. However, another thing that I think is interesting, um, or worth thinking about, is the fact that, like, you know, like him or dislike him, you got to kind of give Salinger some credit for, like, kind of like he's one of the few people who, like, he had wild success. He wrote like an American classic. He had all the fame and all of that stuff from it. And then he intentionally just kind of retreated from it and chose to just make art, and art that's absent from any of those outer desires or whatever. When he was in a position where if he put that stuff out there, it would instantly sell. Um, I mean, there's no question he would have made a fortune publishing more stories. I mean, he made a fortune from just a few books out there. So anyhow, it'll be interesting to see. I'm really curious to see how that plays out. Like, there's a couple things. Like, are the books going to be good? You know, um, it's a huge question. Like, are they going to be any good? Like, because a lot of these are books that were made with no editor. Whereas like a lot of the stuff we're familiar with from Salinger was like, from the New Yorker, and like dealt with like these editors that were incredible editors, um, you know, giving like really valuable feedback and stuff on the stories. So you wonder like if those shackles of the editor or whatever are removed, um, are the stories any good? It's going to be interesting just in a book world kind of thing, it's going to be interesting, I think, to kind of see how that plays out. Um, oh, cool. Oh, I think when I was talking about the unicorn hopping on screen, Philip said the interesting stuff always happens when I'm not there, and did the shrug. And Jake mentioned that aliens juggling dogs, neon lit demons, Minecraft creepers. Those were all things that happened in his absence. Thanks, Jake, for playing ball on that. And then Jake said bone meal was not made to be fast food. I like that. Um, yeah, I'm definitely. That's the thing is like if I have to choose between making fast food and making art, it's like I think it's pretty obvious. Like just from the kind of stuff I make, I'm gonna pick art. Like there's easier ways to kind of be commercially viable than like writing graphic novels about mental illness. You know. Um, let's see here. Uh, okay, Ronnie said, I just want to inspire and bring joy in people's lives, even if it's for the short time. That's good. And nothing wrong with that. We need all types of storytellers, Jake said. And then Philip said he had to cancel and reorder Amazon. The pre-order wouldn't ship till the 21st. That's got to be a Canada thing. I've had so many friends whose pre-orders shipped like instantly. Like a lot of them got them on the 7th. That's really weird. Well, I hope that gets resolved. And he said, but I'll get it sooner though. That's good. Let me know what you think when it does arrive. Jake said that posthumous release idea would totally work in the digital age. Almost makes one want to commit to that. Well, so like that's one of the most interesting things about the Salinger story is I think he might be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he might be the first author to really do that, where he literally has. I mean, if they actually deliver it, I think he might be the first author not to have stuff published posthumously, because that's definitely happened. Authors, musicians, all sorts of people have had that happen. But to actually have like a scheduled book, like where you're like, you have literally mapped out like this is the publication schedule. 5 years from then, this will happen. 5 years after that, this will happen. To have done that with a bunch of work, it's just fascinating. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And the heartbreaking thing will be if that, like, because there is a lot of anticipation. Um, again, Salinger is one of those writers that has become part of the literary canon. And so, of course, there's expectations on what that book would be. Um, Probably one of the most anticipated, literary books in the literary world would be like a Salinger book. Um, can you imagine like what'll happen if it's just awful? Like, I mean, if it's just like the worst thing you can imagine, um, it's almost like you almost wonder if that might have been part of why he chose to kind of posthumously publish it, because it's like, you know, even for a writer, with the amount of just pressure and buildup and expectation for your work, I mean, can you imagine how the writer would deal with that? If you're the writer of like Catcher in the Rye, Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters, Franny and Zoe, 9 stories, and then a dud, like how that would impact your ability to write again. I don't know, it's really interesting. Um, I have to say, it's like, I mean, obviously, I'm not the only person who's found Salinger fascinating, um, but it's interesting. It's just, I would recommend, like, especially if you guys like Salinger, um, just kind of look into like his history and stuff. It's really interesting. Um, he definitely was a strange fella, but a lot of really like compelling stuff in his biography too, including like some really like rough stuff during like World War II that like I was completely unaware of about his biography. Um, I don't know if I like that yellow. I think a deep blue is not a bad move. Okay. Now I'm kind of thinking we are almost done, guys. Can you believe this? Philip said he's going to have me sign Jacobs in Toronto on Saturday. That sounds great, Philip. Jake said top rappers of today literally release music when they're dead, as if the record companies or estates have a need to push for sales after their death when relevancy and value has shot 600 to 100%. Disgusting, to be frank. Yeah, and I think like the weird thing is like I think the posthumous releases in those cases are record companies, taking advantage. I guess the unique thing with the Salinger thing is it's kind of like his own personal wishes are like to have these releases. And so I don't know, it's a very interesting version of that, right? Where quite often it'll be the families releasing stuff that wasn't meant to be released or something like that. But it's like just the fact that this is like something that he has specific, you know, plans and designs for the release of. It's just interesting. It's going to be interesting to see, and hopefully they're good. I'm very excited to kind of at some point in my lifetime to be able to read another Salinger book because he was my favorite writer, probably to this day still is, and so I think that I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see. You guys, we've almost got there. There's one other thing, um, but yeah, it's like I do think it's like it's a little different when it's like a cash grab and it's like a release of something that was like a demo tape that like the artists themselves didn't really want released, which happens a ton, and that's questionable, or there's like the case of Elliott Smith, which I think is a little more acceptable, where he had tracked like the majority of his last album, and then after his death, like they mastered it and released it. Or Nirvana, there were a couple songs that they had already tracked and were intending to release that they ended up kind of mastering and releasing. I think that's a little less shady than some of the like kind of posthumous like um, you know publications of art where it's just like, yeah, the artist was in their bedroom and recorded this crappy demo and never intended for it to be out there, and now here it is. Like that's a little creepier. But yeah, it's going to be interesting in a case where it's just like it's none of that. It's not like um, I don't know. But another thing to kind of consider, and this is like where I don't know, this would make a good story maybe. Um, but like, what happens if the whole thing's fiction and like he never wrote any other books and he's just been talking about this filing cabinet with like a specific publishing schedule for you know almost like 40 to 50 years been telling that tale, and then actually he was just kind of chilling, um, doing absolutely just nothing in this shed for years. That could be really good subject matter. Maybe there's already been somebody who's done this, but that could be good subject matter for like a horror story, you know, where you have this writer. I'm sure this has been done, disappearing to like their shed to like write books, and then you find out they're not writing anything. So I guess it's a little bit of an all work no play kind of scenario there. Yeah, Jake said I'd be pissed too if I had someone compile all my thumbnails, but I'd be busy dirt napping. I like that phrase, dirt napping. Well, that's going to be a good point to stop it at. We finished this page, you guys. It is so fun to do these streams. I really enjoy hanging out with you guys. I appreciate you guys showing up. I'll be doing more probably in the next few days. Yeah, I just really appreciate you guys showing up and hanging out. And I hope you guys are having a good day. If you haven't yet, buy Jacob's Apartment. It's out now. I'm so used to saying pre-order, but it's not pre-order anymore. It's official. It's a book, and it's a beautifully printed book. It's a slice of life, coming of age story about the kinds of questions that can shake even the strongest of faith. Done in the vein of Ghost World or Fun Home, and Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind. If you're into that kind of thing, you're going to love this book. And it's got 130. I'm blanking out on how many pages. It's like 132 pages of beautiful artwork by yours truly. So go pick that up. Also, if you haven't yet, buy my book, Two Stories, which is available on Amazon at a reduced price. And that is a good book as well. Two Stories, Book One, which is an autobiographical story about dealing with depression, done in the vein of like Blankets. So go check that out. And Philip said, it does look great, Josh. It'll be great to see this when it's finished. Thanks. I'm really excited about this book too. This Not Death But Love. Oh my gosh, wait a minute. I was about to wrap and there's one other thing. What did I forget? And you guys don't have to stick around for this, but at the same time, if you want to, I appreciate the company. There was one other thing that I got to do. I forgot that when I do these scenes, I color hold the fire. Can you believe I forgot the color hold on the fire? It's like the stuff of nightmares, forgetting the color hold of the fire. How dare I? So we're going to get to that fire, and we're going to color hold those lines. Oh, do I color hold on the one question I have about the fire color hold? I have to go back to where we see it. Where is the fire color hold? It's on page 9. That's good. Okay, it does cover the log. That was the one thing I was curious about. Because that's what I was going to think was like, if I were color holding fire, which I did, what way would I go about color holding that fire? Would it be over the logs as well? You know what the answer to that is? Yes, it would be. Okay. Does it go fully over the logs? Let's look at that again. One way to find out. Let's open page 9. Let's see. Did we? Yes, it does go fully over the logs. I love it. Yes, fully over the logs. Again, there's moments, man, when you're cartooning where people will think you're just a complete lunatic. If like somebody from outside of my house overheard me, they'd hear me mumbling to myself about color holding the logs and then page numbers and All right, you guys. We did it. Now we're good. Look at that glowing fire. That looks much more convincingly glowing. Okay, now that I did all the groundwork to wrap. Oh, Philip said I need to learn how to do that. How to color hold? So the catch is you're going to separate your black line art. And then you're going to lock your transparent pixels. And then the beauty of that, I can walk you through it at some point, like, you know, in the future. But the beauty of that is then you can just actually get in there and just paint over your lines without any fear of anything. And that's actually pretty rad for quick color holds, which are especially good if you use an animation style. If you're using a lot of animation techniques, color holding those lines, it just brings out the saturation of the color a ton. Oh, there was one other thing we got to do here, which is merge down. And then we're going to go to this. Look at that beautiful business. All right, you guys. Have a good night. And I'll see you on the next stream. Bye.